The Echo in the Strings, Chapter 1. My life, for the most part, had been practical, grounded in the tangible realities of raising a family and making ends meet. I wasn't a woman given to flights of fancy or mystical leanings. I believed in hard work, common sense, and the things you could see and touch. At 55, my children were grown, my nest was empty, and I was navigating the quiet rhythm of a life that felt, at times, a little too predictable. I certainly didn't expect to find myself on a journey guided by something I couldn't explain, a feeling that resonated deep within my soul, pulling me towards a hidden past and a destiny I never knew was mine. It started subtly, a strange restlessness, a feeling of being drawn to things I had never noticed before. The way the light fell on certain objects, the sound of distant music, a longing for something I couldn't name. It was unsettling, this uncharacteristic yearning for something intangible. Then I saw it. In the window of a dusty antique shop, I must have driven past 1,000 times without a second glance. An old violin. It wasn't particularly ornate, its wood worn, its varnish cracked in places. But as I looked at it, a powerful feeling washed over me, a sense of profound familiarity, a pull so strong it felt like a physical force. It was as if the violin was calling to me. I went inside the shop, drawn by an invisible string. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten things. I found the violin, hanging amongst other forgotten treasures. As I reached out and touched its cool, smooth surface, a wave of emotion flooded me, a mixture of sadness, longing, and a strange sense of homecoming. It felt inexplicably important, connected to me in a way I couldn't understand. I knew nothing about violins. I had never played a musical instrument in my life. My childhood was filled with the practicalities of a working-class family. Music was a luxury we couldn't afford in time or money. Yet holding this old violin, my fingers tracing its worn curves, it felt like an extension of myself, a forgotten part of my history. The shop owner, a quiet man with gentle eyes, saw me looking at it. "Ah, the old violin," he said softly. "Been here for years. Seems like nobody wanted her. Almost like she was waiting." Waiting? For me? The phrase echoed the feeling that had drawn me into the shop. It sounded absurd, but holding the violin, it felt true. I asked about its history. The owner knew little, only that it had been part of a collection of items from an old estate, a family named Callaghan, who had lived in the area generations ago. Callaghan. The name meant nothing to me. My family name was Miller. My mother's maiden name was Jones. There was no apparent connection to a Callaghan family. Despite the lack of a logical reason, despite my complete lack of musical talent, I bought the violin. It felt like I had no choice. It was meant to be mine. I brought the violin home, placing it carefully on a stand in my living room. It looked a little out of place amongst my practical furniture, a silent, elegant stranger in my ordinary life. Just looking at it filled me with that strange mixture of longing and familiarity. Over the next few weeks, the feeling intensified. I found myself thinking about the violin constantly, drawn to its silent presence. I started having vivid dreams, dreams filled with music, with soaring melodies that felt both beautiful and heartbreaking. I saw hands moving gracefully over strings, heard music that resonated deep within my soul. But when I woke, the music faded, leaving behind only a lingering echo and a profound sense of loss. I tried to research the Callaghan family, the name the shop owner had mentioned. I visited the local historical society, looked through old town records and genealogical databases. The Callaghan family had indeed been prominent in the area generations ago. But tracing a direct connection to my own family proved difficult. The records were incomplete, and the lines of connection seemed distant, if they existed at all. The more I learned about the Callaghan family, the more a specific detail emerged. They were known for their love of music. There were mentions of family gatherings filled with song, of a particular ancestor, a woman named Eleanor Callaghan, who is said to be an exceptionally gifted violinist, a musical prodigy in a time when opportunities for women in music were limited. Eleanor Callaghan, the name resonated with a strange familiarity, like a forgotten name whispered in a dream. Could there be a connection? Was she somehow related to me? Was this old violin hers? Chapter 2. The idea that the old violin might have belonged to a gifted ancestor, a woman named Eleanor Callaghan, who lived generations ago, felt both exciting and improbable. I knew of no connection to the Callaghan family, no history of musical talent in my own family tree. Yet the pull towards the violin, the vivid dreams of music, the inexplicable sense of familiarity, it all felt deeply significant, guided by something beyond coincidence. I continued my research into Eleanor Callaghan, determined to find out more about her life, and about the fate of her extraordinary musical talent. The Historical Society had limited information, mostly brief mentions in old town records. I needed to dig deeper, to find more personal accounts, more details about her life. I learned that Eleanor Callaghan was born in the mid-1800s. She was said to have been a child prodigy, her musical talent evident from a very young age. In a time when expectations for women were primarily focused on domestic life, her passion for music was unusual, remarkable. But as I delved further into old newspaper archives and family histories, a sadder part of her story emerged. Eleanor's dreams of a career in music, of studying at a prestigious conservatory, were never realized. Her family, while appreciating her talent, felt that a life in professional music was unsuitable for a woman of her social standing. There were also whispers of a personal tragedy, something that cut short her aspirations and led her to abandon her music. The details were vague, shrouded in the discretion of past generations. Her story resonated with me, a sense of kindred spirit across the decades. Societal constraints she faced, the dreams deferred. It felt like a reflection of my own quiet regrets, the paths not taken in my own life due to practicality and circumstance. But how was I connected to her? Was it just a coincidence, a shared sensibility across time? Or was there a more tangible link, a blood connection that explained the inexplicable pull towards her violin, towards her story? My genealogical research continued, a painstaking process of tracing family lines, searching for any crossover between my family tree, the Millers and the Joneses and the Callaghans. It was like searching for a single thread in a vast, tangled tapestry. Then, a breakthrough. While reviewing old census records, I found a record from the early 1900s listing a Thomas Miller, my great-grandfather, and his wife Mary. And listed as living with them was a relative, a widowed cousin named Sarah Vance. The name Vance meant nothing to me. but listed as living with Sarah Vance were her two young children. One name leaped off the page: Eleanor. Eleanor Vance, born in the late 1800s. Her age aligned with the possibility of her being Eleanor Callaghan's daughter. Was it possible that Eleanor Callaghan had married someone named Vance and had a daughter named Eleanor, who, after being widowed, came to live with my great-grandparents? The connection felt tenuous, a series of assumptions based on limited information. But the name Eleanor, the age, the proximity to the Callaghan family's time and place, it felt like more than just a coincidence. I needed to find out more about Sarah Vance and her daughter Eleanor. I searched for marriage records for Eleanor Callaghan, looking for a marriage to a man named Vance. I found a record of Eleanor Callaghan marrying a James Vance in the late 1800s. They had one daughter, named Eleanor, born in 1890. The pieces were fitting together. It seemed that Eleanor Callaghan, the gifted violinist, had married James Vance, had a daughter named Eleanor, and after James Vance passed away, Sarah Vance, perhaps James's sister or cousin, and her daughter Eleanor had come to live with my great-grandparents, the Millers. My family connection to Eleanor Callaghan, the violinist, was through her daughter, who had lived with my great-grandparents. The old violin, could it have been passed down through this line, from Eleanor Callaghan to her daughter Eleanor Vance, and somehow, through a series of events I didn't know, ended up in that antique shop, waiting for me? The feeling of a fated connection intensified. It was as if Eleanor Callaghan's story, her passion for music, her dreams deferred, had somehow echoed through the generations, reaching me, her distant relative, and guiding me to her lost instrument. But why? Why now? Why me? Chapter 3. The discovery of my family's connection to Eleanor Callaghan, the gifted violinist, through her daughter Eleanor Vance, who had lived with my great-grandparents, brought a new layer of understanding to the inexplicable pull I felt towards the old violin. It wasn't just a random antique. It was an object with a history intertwined with my own family tree, a tangible link to an ancestor whose story resonated with a strange familiarity. I delved deeper into the story of Eleanor Callaghan Vance, the daughter. She would have been a contemporary of my grandmother. I searched for information about her life, her interests. Did she inherit her mother's musical talent? Did she carry on her mother's legacy? Finding personal details about Eleanor Vance proved difficult. She lived a quieter life than her gifted mother. Census records listed her, but offered little insight into her personality or passions. The old violin remained a central figure in my life. Just looking at it filled me with a yearning, a sense of connection to the music I heard in my dreams. Despite my lack of musical knowledge, I felt an almost instinctive urge to hold it, to touch the strings, to try and make a sound. One afternoon, unable to resist the pull any longer, I gently picked up the violin. It felt surprisingly natural in my hands, the weight and balance feeling somehow familiar. I carefully drew the bow across the strings, producing a hesitant, scratchy sound. It was far from the soaring melodies of my dreams, but it was a start. I decided I needed to learn to play the violin. It felt like a necessary step in this journey, a way to connect with Eleanor Callaghan's legacy, to understand the passion that had driven her life. I found a local violin teacher, a patient and kind woman named Sarah. I explained that I was an absolute beginner, an older student with no prior musical experience, but with a strange compulsion to learn this particular instrument. Sarah was intrigued by my story and agreed to take me on as a student. Learning the violin at 55 was challenging. My fingers were stiff, my coordination clumsy. The sounds I produced were often screechy and discordant. But there was a deep joy in the process, a sense of connection to something profound. When I held the violin, when I drew the bow across the strings, I felt closer to Eleanor Callaghan, closer to the dreams that had echoed through the generations. As I practiced, strange things began to happen. Sometimes, when I was playing, even just a simple scale, I would have brief flashes of images, hands moving gracefully over strings, a fleeting glimpse of a face that felt both unfamiliar and deeply known. It was like fragments of memory, not my own memories, but something else, something connected to the violin, to its history. I spoke to Sarah about these experiences. She listened attentively, her eyes thoughtful. "Instruments carry energy, Eleanor," she said softly, using my first name. "Especially old ones. They absorb the music, the emotions of the people who played them. Perhaps the spirit of the music, or the musician, is still present in the wood." It sounded mystical, but it resonated with the feeling I had. It was as if the violin was a vessel for Eleanor Callaghan's legacy, and through learning to play it, I was somehow connecting with her suppressed talent, her deferred dreams. My genealogical research into the Callaghans continued alongside my violin lessons. I found more information about Eleanor Callaghan's life, the tragedy that had reportedly led her to abandon music. The details were still vague. But there were hints of a fire, a loss, something that had deeply impacted her and silenced her music. I felt a growing need to understand the full story of Eleanor Callaghan, the gifted violinist, the woman whose dreams were cut short, the woman whose legacy seemed to be reaching out to me across the decades. My connection to her felt increasingly profound, extending beyond bloodlines to a shared sensibility, a shared yearning for music and beauty, a shared sense of dreams deferred. Chapter 4. My journey of learning the violin and uncovering the history of Eleanor Callaghan felt increasingly intertwined, two paths leading to a deeper understanding of a hidden legacy and my own place within it. The flashes of images, the sense of connection to the music, felt like echoes from the past, whispers from an ancestor whose passion for music was so strong it transcended time. I continued to practice the violin diligently, my skills slowly improving. The awkward, discordant sounds gradually gave way to clearer notes, hesitant melodies. And as my playing improved, the feeling of connection to Eleanor Callaghan deepened. It was as if, through the music, I was accessing a part of her that had been silenced, allowing her talent, her passion, to find expression through me. My research into the tragedy that reportedly caused Eleanor Callaghan to abandon her music led me to old newspaper archives from the mid-1800s. I found articles about a fire that had swept through a section of the town, destroying several buildings, including a small music studio where Eleanor reportedly practiced and taught. There were mentions of loss, of irreplaceable instruments destroyed in the blaze. Could the fire have been the tragedy that silenced her music? Did she lose her prized violin in the fire? The old violin I now owned, was it possible it had survived the fire, or was it a different one? I examined the old violin more closely, searching for any identifying marks, any signs of repair that might suggest it had survived a fire or other damage. The wood was worn, the varnish cracked, but there were no obvious signs of fire damage. It was difficult to tell its exact age, but the style and construction seemed consistent with an instrument from the mid-1800s. I showed the violin to Sarah, my teacher. She examined it with interest. "It's an old instrument, Eleanor," she said, her fingers tracing the curves. "Has a lovely tone, even with its imperfections. Hard to say its exact history, but it feels like it has a story to tell." I shared with her the story of Eleanor Callaghan, a gifted violinist. The fire. My growing belief that the violin might be hers, and the feeling of being guided to it. Sarah listened with an open mind, intrigued by the apparent connections. "Perhaps," she said softly, "this violin was spared from the fire. Or perhaps it was a new instrument she acquired after the fire, a way to try and continue her music before something else caused her to stop." The historical records about Eleanor Callaghan's life after the fire were sparse. She married, had a daughter, lived a quiet life. There was no mention of her performing or teaching music after the fire. It seemed that, for whatever reason, her musical journey had indeed ended prematurely. My own musical journey, however, was just beginning, a late life flowering of a talent I never knew I possessed. A talent that felt like an echo of Eleanor Callaghan's own. The more I played, the more natural it felt, the more the music resonated within me. It was as if the years of suppressed artistic yearning, the unlived life of the 18-year-old girl with dreams of art history, had somehow found a new outlet, a new form of expression through the violin. The feeling of a faded connection to Eleanor Callaghan grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just about sharing a distant relative and a passion for music. It felt like I was continuing something she had been forced to abandon, fulfilling a destiny delayed for generations. I learned more about Eleanor Callaghan Vance, the daughter, my connection to her. She didn't appear to have inherited her mother's musical talent in the same way. Her life was more conventional. It seemed the musical legacy had skipped a generation, or perhaps had been suppressed again, waiting for a different time, a different person to emerge. And that person, guided by an inexplicable pull, by dreams of music, by an old violin in a dusty antique shop, was me. Chapter 5. My journey, guided by intuition and an old violin, had led me to a hidden legacy, a connection to a gifted ancestor whose dreams were cut short. I had uncovered the story of Eleanor Callaghan, the violinist, the fire that likely silenced her music, and her daughter, Eleanor Vance, who had lived with my great-grandparents, providing the link between her story and mine. And in learning to play the violin, I had discovered a talent I never knew I possessed, a talent that felt like an echo of my ancestors' own, a destiny waiting to be fulfilled. The old violin was no longer just an antique. It was a tangible connection to the past, a vessel for a suppressed legacy. An instrument that had somehow waited for decades to find its way to me, to awaken a dormant talent, to continue a musical journey that had been interrupted generations ago. My life, once grounded in the practical and predictable, was now infused with a sense of wonder, of mystery, of a larger story in which I played an unexpected part. The dreams of music, the feeling of being drawn, they were not just random occurrences, but threads of destiny, weaving together my life with that of my ancestor, guiding me towards a hidden calling. I continued to play the violin, dedicating myself to the music, to honoring Eleanor Callaghan's legacy. I performed at local community events, shared my music with friends and family. There was a deep joy in sharing the music, a feeling that I was giving voice to something that had been silent for too long. My children were surprised by this late-life passion, this unexpected turn in my life. But they saw the joy it brought me, the sense of purpose it instilled. They were supportive and encouraging, witnessing the transformation in their mother. The story of Eleanor Callaghan, the gifted violinist whose dreams were cut short, became a part of my family's narrative, a hidden chapter brought to light. I shared her story with my children and grandchildren, ensuring that her legacy, her passion for music, would not be forgotten. The old violin sat on its stand in my living room, a beautiful, silent presence when I wasn't playing. It was a reminder of the journey I had taken, the intuition I had followed, the hidden talent I had discovered. It was a testament to the fact that some dreams, some callings, are so strong they can resonate across generations, waiting for the right time, the right person to emerge. My life at 55 had felt predictable, quiet, but the old violin had opened a door to a world of unexpected possibilities, a world filled with music, with history, with a profound sense of connection to a past I never knew was mine. The echo in the strings was no longer just a dream. It was the sound of my own life, playing out a destiny that had been waiting for me, a melody that was finally finding its voice. The practical woman had discovered the power of the intangible, the guidance of intuition, the fated pull of a hidden legacy, and in doing so, had found a new sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the extraordinary tapestry of a life.